Again, welcome to the WBC through Rethinking and Accelerating Diversity and Women's Leadership in Business Forum. We're thrilled to have you join us today. As well, we're thrilled to kick off the Rethinking and Driving Corporate Purpose section of the program. Our first panel in this section.
Welcome to Innovating Gender Equity in Companies of Purpose. This session will begin soon.
Again, welcome to the WBC Rethink and Accelerating Diversity and Women's Leadership in Business Forum. We are thrilled to have you join us today. As well, we are thrilled to kick off the Rethinking and Driving Corporate Purpose section of this program. Our first panel in this section is Innovating in Gender Equity in Companies of Purpose. In this discussion, we will discuss the innovation and trends in driving corporate purpose and what members of the ACLI and others are doing to drive purpose collectively, Cindio's work in driving pay equity, and with BCG and Bright House, the importance of purpose and corporate impact. To kick us off is Jose Zalestra, CEO of Gender Fair, WBC board member and co-chair of the WBC Companies of Purpose. Take it away, Jose.
Thank you, Gwen. In the past couple of years, we've seen more and more companies driving greater innovation with positive societal impact during a period of great uncertainty and complexity. The trend for these purpose-driven companies does not seem to be slowing down. Corporate leaders know that consumers, employees, and investors want to work for, buy from, and invest in companies that care about building a better future for all. And it seems to be paying off. In fact, according to a study by Havas Worldwide, found that brands that ranked high on purpose and meaning experienced more market success than lower rated brands and grow on average 3 times faster than their competitors. And as for gender equity, a recent survey by Gender Fair found that nearly 3 in 5 respondents would switch brands if they knew one was committed to better fairness practices, with men saying they would do so slightly more than women. So what's behind this movement? And how do we know a company is authentic in what they communicate? Or are they just using this as a PR tool? How are companies successfully driving purpose in their organizations? And how does this benefit gender equity today and in the long run? These are some of the questions that we will explore during the panel with those on the ground creating not just purpose in their own business, but also beyond as they influence their clients and member organizations. The businesses they represent are also part of WBC's key initiative on companies of purpose that will continue to explore and share best practices around this topic. I will now introduce each of the panelists. First, we have Susan Neely, President and CEO of the American Council of Life Insurers, or ACLI, whose mission is to help families live better lives by achieving financial security and certainty. ACLI member organizations represent 94% of industry assets and provide financial security products and services to 90 million families. Under her leadership, ACLI launched the Economic Empowerment and Racial Equity Initiative to tackle issues like addressing systemic inequality and closing savings gaps. Life insurance are championing the adoption of enhanced protections that act in consumers' best interest. And Susan is widely recognized as one of the most influential people in association leadership. She's a 2-time Trade Association CEO of the Year, one of Washingtonians' most influential people, and 100 most powerful women in Washington. Next, we have Maria Colicachero, the CEO of Cindio, a SaaS startup helping companies around the world create an equitable workplace for all employees, regardless of gender, race, or ethnicity. Prior to Cindio, she co-founded Smartsheet.com, which went public in 2008 and spent 3 years at Starbucks, which is one of the first Fortune 50 companies to go public with PayEquity results. Having started her career working on congressional campaigns, she has a long history of mission-driven work and a compassionate and competitive attitude to spur change. Maria serves on the board of the nonprofit Fair Pay Workplace and has been named by Goldman Sachs Builders and Innovators Summit as one of this year's 100 most intriguing entrepreneurs. And now to Kathy Carlisi. Kathy has gone piranha fishing in the Amazon, survived a 150-kilometer two-day bike race with a night camping at a whiskey distillery, and gotten married in Rome with a papal blessing. But she considers helping to pioneer the purpose movement her most thrilling challenge. Kathy began her career in advertising, winning awards at top-tier agencies, including Carmichael, Lynch, and Fallon, and then joined Bright House, a Boston consulting group company, shortly after its founding. She has invested 23 years growing its processes, products, frameworks, and staff into the premier purpose consultancy. She has led seminal work across geographies and industry, from financial to consumer to industrial goods. Welcome to these amazing panelists. So let's start with Susan. As CEO of ACLI, how do you drive purpose in and through your organization with an emphasis on gender equity?
Well, hello to everyone, and thank you for having me. I think I want to go hang with Maria and Kathy. They sound so interesting. So that may be one of the big takeaways from this is that these are very cool women, and I need to get on their dance card somehow. But more seriously, I'm thrilled to engage more deeply on this subject because it's one, how can we have impact using all the might and muscle of our individual companies and organizations that really moves the needle on societal problems. It's something I believe in deeply. I think the short answer is yes, it can be done. And I think it's so useful to have a session on this to share different ways that we all are thinking about this so we can learn from each other and go out and have more impact. I would say from my own perspective that, purpose is, what's a company or organization with purpose? It's one that thinks about impact, and it's impact beyond what it is that your company does for a living. It's how do you take that, all the capabilities you have to make the world a better place for your customers, consumers, your communities, your country, for society as a whole, right? And so it's not just words on paper, it's not principles, it's not, just giving a check to a charity. It's really taking what you have as your assets and figuring out how to make a difference. So speaking on behalf of the life insurance industry, I run a trade association that, as you said, represents, the majority of the whole sector. And the way we think about it is that, yes, we provide important products to people, life insurance, disability insurance, retirement savings, vehicles, long-term care insurance. But what is that really? It's providing protection. It's helping families achieve financial security. And then how does that play out for an association on their behalf whose big mission is to drive good public policy? Well, I think the best example I can give that's germane to this, the forum today is financials. There are gaps in protection for women. As a gender, we have more challenges in achieving financial security than our male counterparts. So how do we, as the life insurance sector, address that? Not just standing here passively and saying we have great products for you, but really getting into what the weeds on why there are financial security gaps. Why are women more challenged? We live longer, for heaven's sake. Why are we more challenged in having financial security? And the answers are not going to surprise you. I mean, it starts with pay equity. It starts with we're more likely to be caregivers and take time off from work. And of course that, we carry 2/3 of the student loan debt in this country. So if you think about just saving for a financially secure retirement, and again, we live longer, you're already challenged from the start because of these inequities or needs that you have to fill what is a concern for the family. I mean, on the good news, 95% of us are key to the financial decisions a family makes, but then we have these headwinds or barriers in achieving financial security. So that's how we think about it as the life insurance, the association that represents the life insurance sector. How do we give more visibility to our needs as a gender in terms of financial security? And what are the policies at all levels of government, state, federal, and international, that we can be front and center on driving to a solution. And sure, we have knowledge and expertise as the life insurance sector around these products, but it's bigger than us. There's policies we get behind because we want to make a difference on the societal need and closing the gender gap as it relates to financial security.
Yeah, so important. Before you joined ACLI, you led the American Beverage Association, where you helped companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola navigate the sugar wars by forging an unlikely alliance and partnership with President Clinton's Global Initiative and First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move campaign. So how are you taking this learning from that time to ACLI, where you have to rally an entire industry of 280 member companies around a common vision that benefits society?
Right. Well, it goes back to the fundamentals. What if you start with the beverage sector? Again, I was running the association that represented that sector, the non-alcoholic beverage sector. What do we care about? Well, we care about having, healthy and happy consumers and communities. So there are concerns about people not able to live a balanced, healthy life because they're consuming too many calories. So what do we own in this? Well, we have products that have calories. We have all kinds of products. And if people consume too many calories, they're not going to have that healthy, balanced lifestyle. So what can we do about this? And it starts with not just giving checks out to charitable organizations, not that that's not important or helpful, but it starts with really what do we own at the core, and what we do with our own products and the way we engage with consumers, because beverage companies are pretty good at that, that will make a difference in how they enjoy our products and how they balance their calories. And what we concluded is, well, let's have more options with less calories. Let's have more waters. Let's have some flavor in the water. Let's have bubbles in the water. Let's have smaller portions of the higher calorie things. Let's put calorie labels right in the front there so you know exactly what you're consuming. Let's put nudges out there on our vending machines. So it was a wholesale look at what the beverage industry owned and could control that would make a difference. And then we step forward at all the competitors, and you all know about the cola wars, they're very real. All the competitors said, and let's do it with a big time partner. Let's do it with President Clinton and the Clinton Global Initiative, and how can we drive change and behavior change in a meaningful way. Let's do it with the First Lady of the United States of America, who's launching a big initiative to end obesity in a generation and support her Let's Move effort. So there's a lot that went into that over many, many years, but I'm trying to summarize it in a way so people can think about it around what do you own, what can you do to make a difference, and do it with a serious partner that will bring more visibility to the effort and keep you on track. So we've taken that same approach here at the life insurance, on behalf of the life insurance sector, and are looking at how we can help close the racial wealth gap, again, using our core attributes and skills and knowledge to good.
That's great. And tell me just a little bit about the Economic Empowerment and Racial Equity Initiative and how this will impact so many underrepresented populations.
Well, our Economic Empowerment and Racial Equity Initiative is focused on how we can use our capabilities and resources to help close the racial wealth gap. Back to, what's our value proposition? We provide financial security to all Americans, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender, age and stage in life, or where they live. So how do we do that in a meaningful way around this big societal challenge? And what can we do that's uniquely beneficial? That's a question we posed to our board of directors in 2020, the summer of 2020, when the nation engaged in a very re-engaged in a very intense conversation about racial relations and racial justice and racial equity. And our answer was a commitment to our Economic Empowerment and Racial Equity Initiative that has 4 pillars around diversity in our boards and executive teams, about making more financial security products available to more people, advancing financial education. But the big one that we have just announced that I think is going to be very meaningful at moving the needle is to launch a 501c3 affiliate that will allow us to aggregate life insurance company investments to tackle the affordable housing crisis. And why I say we are uniquely positioned to do this is because we make long-term investments in the US economy. Last year alone, we made $7.4 trillion of investments in the US economy. We make these investments for 10, 15, 20, 30 or more years. And what we realized, if we could aggregate our investments and take on the affordable housing crisis, as people probably know, affordable housing is kind of core to financial security for a family. And it's also a pathway to wealth generation for families. If we could band together to do this using our core power and set up a 501c3 affiliate so we can attract other smart partners, foundations, governments, and others, we think we can really make a difference. So we spent 1.5 years in due diligence. We've just announced the commitment, and we've got 36 major insurance companies involved, and much more to say as we get this thing going. But I'm a lot of interest and buzz amongst the external community that specializes in affordable housing. So I'm very optimistic we're going to be able to move the needle in a way that just hasn't been done before throughout generations.
Well, thank you so much, Susan, for all you're doing on creating or achieving greater financial security for so many. And now I'd like to turn it over to Maria. You have always been a visionary, starting with Smartsheet. And Alcindio is a story about reimagining the way the world works for the benefit of employees. How is Cindio transforming society in this regard?
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me. And thank you, Susan. I feel like I just got a masterclass in foundations and creating movements. I mean, that's really what you're doing, is creating movements in various industries and pointing a bunch of folks in the right direction with similar goals. So thank you for sharing. That was so interesting to listen to. So yes, I mean, we envision a workplace that unlocks opportunity for all employees. So from a platform perspective, our vision is we're using software. So we help modern companies embed workplace equity into their core business so they can achieve long-term value and enduring success. So what we do is we identify pay gaps in seconds and constantly measure employee opportunity and representation so that employers can build diverse and dynamic teams through the entire organization. So it's really important to think about workplace equity with two sides. You've got pay equity, which is equal work for equal pay. So are people in similar jobs? Is someone being paid unfairly because of gender, race, or ethnicity? Now, for employers, this is a relatively easy problem to solve, particularly if you're using technology to constantly stay on top of it, identify the policies and behaviors in your company that are broken and fixing those, because you can throw money at it. It's a remediation issue. And then, of course, you have to figure out what's under the surface and what policies you need to fix. But once you do that, you have a good chance of staying on top of it over time. The other side of the coin to achieve workplace equity is around opportunity. So when we talk about the pay gap, it's not really about pay. It's about movement, opportunity creation. Are folks in your organization being given equitable opportunities to move up to that next level? And if not, why not? Where are the gaps? Why are they happening? And so that really is the vision for our company. We started, and for 3 years, we're really focused on how do we create pay equity, meaning equal work for equal pay. We have over 200 clients that are doing this very successfully, including about 13% of the Fortune 200. But now we're expanding that to focus on movement and opportunity, because that's key. If you think about how wealth compounds over time, if you have a component of your workforce that's not moving up to the next level and you don't know why, all the peanut butter sort of generic DEI approaches that you want to take to address that, if you're not using data to identify the specific clear area where you need to take action, you're not going to make a ton of progress. And I think that's why we've seen this just tremendously glacial pace with which we're addressing the pay gap. I mean, now we're set back, more years because of the pandemic. And prior to the pandemic, it was, 250 years before we were going to solve it. And that's part of the problem is for the past decade, there's been this rise in DEI, but it's just been really, it hasn't been a data-driven effort.
Right. Well, and equity in the workplace is something that's gone from a nice to have to critically essential for employees, investors and boards and regulators and the C-suite. So how has that happened in such a short period of time? And what's driving this change?
It's interesting, the acceleration. I mean, any of you that are following the pay transparency legislation, it started with Colorado, now it's New York City, then New Jersey, Washington State, Oregon. And what this requires is for employers to post the salary range of any advertised job. That is a pay transparency piece that actually brings accountability to companies. And so legislation and compliance, that's one aspect as to why this is accelerating so quickly. But it's also the pandemic and the largest social movement in American history. They drove employees to really reconsider their role in the economy and made them realize they've got this power to change company behavior. So employees are now demanding equity, transparency. I want a commitment to shared values. They're looking at employers and they're saying, you need me. The war for talent is over. I've won. And so please tell me now, employer, why are you worthy of my labor? And employers are struggling to tell this story because they're realizing that performative lip service gestures around how they value their people, those no longer work. They have to prove it. So employees is the second piece of this. You've got legislation, you've got the voice of the employee really growing in terms of the loudness of that and the collective of that. And then I would say the third is institutional investors and activist investors. So you're seeing consistently, Google had their proxy vote a week and a half ago, 10 items were around components of ESG. And a lot of those aren't in the S, the human capital behaviors that institutional investors are now starting to see this real link between what does your company culture look like? Is it toxic? What do you think of your CEO? How are you valuing your people? Are you doing pay equity? Are you looking at promotion analysis? What does your executive team look like from the perspective of how many are from underrepresented backgrounds? They're starting to look at these things and tying it to long-term value creation. So you're seeing this consistent drumbeat of the S in ESG is now sort of becoming this focal point. And there's been an explosion of proxy votes that are reflecting this. So that's the third pressure point.
Well, thank you, Maria. I started my career in pay equity, actually, and a little bit disheartened that we're still discussing this, and this is still a big issue. But so glad that Syndio is addressing it in such a meaningful way. So thank you for that. And now I'd like to turn it over to Kathy. In your line of work, you see a lot of companies playing catch up when it comes to purpose, while others have a long history and have made purpose part of their DNA. What are some examples of authentic practices rather than using it as a tagline or advertisement or a PR campaign?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having Bright House here today, and to be with Susan and Maria and you is amazing. Like, you guys, I'm so glad we're recording this. And I just want to say, like, I want a copy of this recording. Preaching to the choir, but it's always so good to hear these finely tuned voices. So thank you. Yeah, so this is the battle we fight as the firm who's, I would argue, been doing this the longest, is people want to be on this bandwagon. They see the data now. We're gonna make money if we're purpose driven. So they imagine that if they could just fly the banner, Susan, right? Like, put it up on the wall, all will be well. And I always say it's like saying, I'm on a diet, and meanwhile I'm scarfing down donuts, right? You have, the actions have to be reflective of that lens of purpose. So the best example I can think of right now, because it's happening right now, and we're really, really proud of it. So I don't think many people on this video have a tractor. Maybe you do. Nonetheless, you've probably heard of John Deere. So 180-year-old company, the CEO looks around and says, okay, as the industry leader, we must lead to make agriculture way more sustainable. So environmentally and for our customers. To do that required and is requiring massive transformation, org model, the kind of talent, innovation, all of it, right? Going digital, marrying the hard metal with the hard data. So BCG, who is our parent company, brought Brighthouse in because without the emotional connection to why this work mattered, it was just going to be painful, like really, really painful to transform. So interestingly, what they did, and if you go on, I have links if I can send out, but if you go on YouTube or LinkedIn, you'll see a film, Our Next Leap. When the CEO announced this big strategic transformation, he launched it through the lens of their purpose. Their purpose, we run so life can leap forward. The strategy, our next leap. So it was all about couching purpose, not in the purpose statement when they first launched it, not in just kind of, pontificating and inspiring, but action. They started with the action. So that makes us really, really proud. One other quick thing on John Deere, they also were able to then look at their purpose principle. One of them, we forged the cutting edge. So inherent in their DNA for 200 years almost was this notion of they don't innovate just to make cool stuff. They start with their customer and say, what does that person need to be successful? And that's what's driving their innovation and everything forward now.
And how do you hope that this will positively impact gender equity across the industries?
Yeah. So like today, more and more of the clients I work with day in and day out are women. It's not nearly enough, but again, way more than there used to be. And when you give a woman leader this crisp lens of purpose to look through, she and her team are able to address gender equity in a really, really authentic way. And when I say that, and y'all know, right, the minute a company starts doing something to be compliant, as Maria said, like you didn't earn my labor. You're purpose washing or you're gender washing or whatever. So quick example, there's a client of ours, Bank of Montreal, BMO. They just purchased Bank of the West, so getting more into the United States from Canada. If you Google BMO for women, you will see this massive effort they're doing. Their purpose is to boldly grow the good. So they realized exactly what you were saying, Maria, is that whether it's something like 5% of business loans are given to women, whether it's poverty level, living below, all of that, they couldn't boldly grow the good in the world without starting with women. So tons of efforts, education, big programs, products, all of it. Really cool one is called Bolder, but there's an H in it, like bold her. So they're doing things not only in their own organization to be this bank for women, but also broadly in the world.
Yeah, and Maria mentioned ESGs, and as companies, more and more companies adopt ESG factors in their organizations. How do we make sure that the S, or the social in ESG, gets elevated and not lost in the conversation? And I'll have Maria answer after your thoughts as well.
Yeah, I'm going to take something Maria said because it was like one of those things where I wanted to cheer and raise my hands in the air. Living purpose isn't writing a check to a charity, right? It's looking at whether it's the beverage industry or John Deere or banking, the entire business model. What are we making? How are we making it? So strategy, culture, is our culture toxic? Like what are we, putting people through on a daily basis? Are we elevating them or not? So this notion of social, it must be embedded within the organization, and they must look at that impact. So we always say, when you articulate a purpose, you should do something called like a bold commitment. What are you going to say for society? What is that social piece? And again, I would suggest y'all Google this because it's super inspiring. John Deere did something called the LEAP Coalition. And again, this idea of partnership. So LEAP is an acronym in this case: legislation, education, advocacy, and production systems to support, in partnership, with National Black Growers Council and Thurgood Marshall, Black farmers. So after slavery was, struck down, et cetera, people were given 40 acres and a mule, right? So we've all heard that story. What we didn't hear is that over time, they were never given a title. They were never given a deed. So now there's all this stuff going on where John Deere is working with, people to help legitimize these land ownerships for Black farmers, because they're being threatened all over the place, and they're helping them run a profitable business and be sustainable. So if purpose isn't knit into the day-to-day business, because that is good for their business, make no mistake, then all you're doing is penning a check to charity. So the S is critical. Yeah.
Maria, what are your thoughts on making sure the S does not get lost in the ESGs?
Yeah, I mean, so all of you in the audience are leaders. And I think the question I always ask myself is, I lead a smaller team than maybe many of you. We have 140 people. But if my people come to me publicly or privately and ask whether the company that they work for has ensured there are no differences in compensation because of race or gender, can I respond with confidence? And I think that's at the heart of this, because you have to, as a leader, have that deep down, ultimately rooted confidence that it's true. If there's any vestige of doubt, your people are going to see it immediately. And I think that's what's on the table right now for CEOs, because as you think about these pay transparency laws, as you think about the California median pay gap bill, which would, lay companies bare in terms of a full body scan on how they're doing with representation, because they'd have to acknowledge by race, gender, ethnicity, and EO1 categories what their pay gap is. We've got to have confidence that we can tell our people that not only is equitable pay and opportunity the foundation of culture, it's also the foundation to any sort of commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion. Like, what gets more foundational or table stakes than pay? So to me, the way to really focus on, are we doing everything to truly commit and have concrete steps toward the S and ESG? I mean, the outcomes or the outputs that institutional investors are starting to look at are things like, attrition rates, their employee engagement scores, their employee NPS. So would your people recommend that you work, at that company? They're also starting to look on Glassdoor and Blind. So make no mistake, if your rankings are starting to tank on those sites, like, investors are starting to look at that. So to me, the first step fundamentally is for us as leaders to be able to say to our people with confidence that we know we're paying and giving opportunity for movement fairly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now I'd like to just open it up to the panelists with some generic questions. What do you think is the most important thing companies can do now to create action for impact, rather just words on paper, as you mentioned, Susan?
I guess I'll jump in. We've all said it in our ways. It's not just words on paper, or Johanna, as you said, it's not a PR campaign. I actually wrote that down because I think it's a really important starting point. And if we want more credit for how we can move the needle around the S, we need to think about this in a more fulsome way. I'm so glad you asked that question about the emphasis on the S, because in Washington, we tend to sort of get into this conventional mindset, and while you say ESG, all the focus is on the E. And of course, climate change is huge, but it's an and, not an or. And the more we can set the tone at the top, I think that's the answer to your question, for those of us at the top of organizations, that the S really matters. And it's not something to comply with a California law or an EU law or a law coming out of Congress. It's something that's fundamental to how we roll as a company and an organization. Just establishing that as a priority for your board of directors and for your executive leadership and senior team, I think that's the starting point. And then you go from there. It's not a PR campaign. It's not a check. It's a fundamental way of working that ultimately, I think it nearest to the bottom line. All these ideas we're putting out there, having diverse teams and having people feel like they're connected to a mission, not just some kind of tactical effort to sell products, that keeps people, that keeps the best and brightest, that produces better outcomes. So none of this is puffery. All of this should be core to how a company and organization rolls. But I think the tone at the top is really, really important, and thinking about the S as fundamental to our success.
That's right. Thank you.
Puffery. I love puffery.
Puffery.
It's a great word.
Kathy, what do you think companies can do to create, action for impact, rather than PR or words on paper?
Yeah, I totally agree with, we always say purpose has to be leader-led. It's like if we are engaged to do purpose in an organization and we don't have access to the CEO and the C-suite, we actually won't do it because we just know it'll fail. The other piece I would say, in today's world, listening. We are always looking at our EVP here at Bright House. And when we kind of embarked on this formally, the first thing our CEO and myself as heading up North America said is, we can't sit in a room and make this up. Like, we have to hear the tough stuff. Like, we have to listen and ask the questions and respond authentically. So I really think the generations coming up have incredible ideas, and they're very different from how Gen X came up thinking about the workplace. So we have to, as leaders, be authentic, but we've got to listen.
Yeah, absolutely. Maria, anything from you in terms of action for impact? Companies.
Yeah, I think Susan and Kathy spoke so well to the company side. I want to speak to us as individuals, as women. I mean, this is Women's Business Collaborative. So I think they're spot on in terms of it's got to be leader-led, everything that you both said. But as women, like, why are we accepting this? Why are we settling for less? This should be, as you both said, a leadership imperative, but we must start rejecting this idea that, well, women need to learn to negotiate better. Well, women have imposter syndrome. Women make different choices. Women opt out of those promotions. It is not our responsibility to learn to negotiate better. It is a company's responsibility to be accountable and ensure that they are not paying people less because of something like gender or race. We just had a client that is a fairly new client, went through their first remediation utilizing the software. There was a woman who was remediated to the tune of $40,000. So just like, imagine this woman and the compounding wealth that has been not there for her over the course of her career. Because again, we don't ask prior salary now, but we're inferring that via level and other things. This is systemic. And so if you think about, she's been underpaid by $40,000, what is the loss of the earnings over the course of her life? So I think as women, as leaders, like, we've got to start rejecting this notion that this is our responsibility to fix. This is our responsibility in our position as leaders in a company, but we've got to create companies where the company is accountable to ensuring that this is table stakes and not a thing. It's a solvable problem. It's completely solvable.
I just want to pile onto that because I think you're exactly right. And I think we should have the courage of our convictions and know our value and be able to speak up. I've longer tooth and have more mileage on me in a career than the rest of the distinguished panelists. And I'll say certainly the early messages were, you infiltrate from within, you figure out how the old boy system works, and you adapt to it. And I think I was probably in my late 30s, 40, when I was finally around the senior table. And I thought, okay, no more adapting. You have to, you don't need to scream at people, but you need to use this platform that you've earned to speak up and to provide a different point of view, because we do have a different point of view. It's not that all women are cookie cutters, but it is a perspective that's really important. And so I feel very compelled to use the platform that is available to me to help advance understanding, to help change systems, and to help, as you just said, Maria, these are table stakes for how we need to roll, not sort of appeasements of legislators or regulators or things we have to do to keep the shareholders happy. They're not these one-offs. These are table stakes for running a strong company and organization. But I really encourage people to use their platform, use it constructively. You don't have to punch people in the nose, but be willing to say what's what, because your point of view and perspective and solutions matter.
Oh, these are some great thoughts. And we just have a few minutes left, but I just wanted to ask and open it up to the panelists. What's next for companies of purpose? As you look into the future, what trends are you seeing? Is this a movement? What's next? I'll just open it up to anyone who wants to answer that.
I'll just take a stab at looking at the volatility in the economy. I mean, we're dealing with decades high inflation. There's the war in Ukraine. We've got the labor market where it is. You've got, tech companies just getting punched in the face in terms of their valuations. And I think what we have to ask ourselves as leaders, if you're thinking about workforce changes or even layoffs, I mean, that's not out of the question right now for a lot of companies that are dealing with supply chain issues or things that have just been percolating for a while. What do you want your legacy to be? Because in times of crisis, often fairness takes a backseat. And so we're constantly out there talking about things like adverse impact. Discretion can creep in just as when you hire, also when you contract. So really think about and keep top of mind as leaders, as you're looking at navigating the volatility, how do you think about the discretion that's involved in making those decisions? Because it really does matter.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing I would add to that, just given the times we're in, if there was any silver lining out of the pandemic, this horrible global health challenge, it was the way we've learned how to work remotely and do things differently. And I think it's a very powerful moment to figure out how to use the good of that to really foster work-life balance in a way that was not attainable, I think, for many of us prior to the pandemic. And so I don't want any rolling back of the tide. I want us to capture what we've learned and put it to good use, and again, make society better for all of us, male, female, that are in the workforce and trying to make a contribution, but also have a personal life as well.
All right.
Just quickly, I'll just say one thing is, we've always had this philosophy at Bright House that because business touches every human endeavor, it has a responsibility to humanity. And I think as, you're calling out with world governments doing what world governments seem to be doing these days, there is even more of an onus in the future, I think, on business and organizations to take up some of that slack. And I'll end it with that.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kathy and Susan, Maria, for your insights and for the work you do each and every day to bring purpose to the forefront of your business and those of your clients and member organizations. WBC has an exciting initiative called Companies of Purpose and has almost 20 organizations taking part. We're looking to expand on this list, so if anyone listening to this conversation and wants to be part of it, please reach out to WBC. And now I will turn it over back to Gwen.
Thank you, Jose, Susan, Maria, and Kathy. This is fantastic, and I love the great analysis of the shift in ESG, the focus on impact, and as I always love to say, the changing of organizations and systems. Our next panel on purpose, innovations in D&I, will start at 12:15 p.m. Please take a short break and join us again at 12:15. Thank you all.
Thank you for attending.